Good evening, everyone, and welcome to EDBTA's fifth live webinar. My name is Angelica Drucker. I'm a clinical psychologist and I will be moderating this webinar. I'm very honored to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Amy Gaglia Esletsbichler. She's an accredited DBT therapist, supervisor, and a consultant trainer in DBT. Amy volunteers with the Society for DBT in the UK and Ireland, where she holds the position of chair. She's been practicing DBT since 2002, and she became a calibrated DBT adherence rater in 2010, and have been doing it continuously since. The adherence ratings have been a part of her work with different research projects for the Society for DBT in the UK and Ireland, and the Linehan Board of Certification. We're very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Angelica. Thank you very much for this invitation to speak. It came about in a very interesting sort of way. As you know, I'm part of the EDBTA conference committee, and I showed up I showed up right on time for a conference committee meeting, but I managed to crash into the dissemination committee's meeting when you were all deciding the webinar schedule. And somebody said, I think it was Martin Boer, said, you can do something on adherence. So here I am, having been volunteered to do something on adherence. But I say this, and I'm deeply honored by this invitation. This is a topic that is extremely near and dear to my heart. So I say this by way of also acknowledging that I think there are many people who work behind the scenes in adherence rating and are in the hidden corners that come out sometimes and stick their head out and say, yeah, I do that too. So I imagine that there are other people who are perfectly capable of talking about this. So thank you very much, though, for the invitation, and I hope that I will do this justice for you. So, pardon?
No, we're certain of it. I was just going to say, we're certain of it.
Yeah, just thank you. Thank you. So I just would begin with my webinar plan here. We'll begin with some mindfulness, some definitions about some relevant terms related to adherence. We'll discuss a little bit about adherence and implementation, something about the scales, and then we'll have a practice and discussion of practical steps should you wish to take this forward yourself in any way, shape, or form. So we always begin with our conflicts of interest. I think it's helpful to understand who I am and what I do so that you can be fully aware of what my biases might be. So first of all, I receive payment from British Isles DBT to train and supervise in DBT. And I'm also a director for IBS GmbH, which is a subsidiary of British Isles DBT. So it's important to keep those things in mind. And first and foremost, I would say that I am a trainer. I am a trainer and a therapist, first and foremost, a therapist and supervisor who has kind of dabbled in research. So it's important to keep those things in mind. As we move on here, I thought it would be helpful for us to do what we do in DBT before we get into the details, right? And that is to begin with our usual mindfulness practice as we start anything related to DBT. So I'm going to invite you here in this evening with us, or anybody who might be watching this after the fact, to assume a mindfulness position, sit as straight up as you can, comfortably hold it we'll do this for maybe 2 minutes, palms up in your lap, the willingness posture here, willing hands, and, maybe as Martin Boas often says, give yourself a little smile and say hello to yourself. And what I would like you to do is just seek out your wise mind on this, like where is your wise mind? And here we're just going to observe, describe, participate, whatever you'd like. I think it's mostly observe and describe here. What happens to you when I say adherence in DBT? What are your reactions? Now, as you're doing this practice, of course, your mind will get called off by all sorts of things. That's perfectly fine. But when you notice that, try to come back to those concepts here. You can do this with your eyes closed, your eyes open, whatever's most comfortable for you. I'll begin by ringing my bell, and then in 2 minutes, we'll end the practice and we can just see what comes up for you as we just begin to talk about these concepts this evening. So here we are, mindfulness and mindfulness of your reactions, adherence in DBT. Okay, so I won't take any feedback, obviously, from the audience because, whoops, we are not in that kind of situation. But just to say that some common reactions often include things like, it's boring, right? Is that kind of the worst thing that a person could possibly be these days? Boring, right? Or lots of other emotions might come up, like fear or shame or guilt or anger, I suppose. And I guess occasionally there might be some joy. Or maybe your reaction was a bit incredulous, like, I thought this was a principle-driven therapy with lots of different strategies. How can there be rules about this? Adherence? You want me to do what? Like, come on. Or maybe you think, oh, here we go again. The DBT police are here, and they want to enforce some laws. And those people who think that, I imagine, are also probably the very people saying, something like, that Amy, yeah, I always thought she was a bit anarchistic, right? And while it is true that my 4-year-old self did want to be in the police, I'm going to venture that that had more to do with growing up in the Bronx in 1978 than a true lifelong desire to be in law enforcement of any kind. And at the same time, I can say that when I came to DBT, I had a desire to deliver it with clarity and precision and compassion. That was very important to me. And as a social work intern, when I first learned DBT at New York Hospital in 2002, I can honestly say that I felt a sense of relief, like, oh, there's a manual. There's a manual I can adhere to. There's like a recipe book that I can follow. And I did feel a certain sense of relief. And so maybe those were part of the things that drove me toward wanting to do this. Now, I have to acknowledge this is probably not the most exciting of topics, and part of this talk tonight will be very kind of technical and dry potentially. But hopefully at the end of this, you will feel as passionate about this as I do. So going back to that idea that I had hoped that, that I had wanted to do DBT with passion and precision and compassion, as we say in DBT, I was very fortunate in my journey to move to London and to start a DBT team with a man called Martin Zinkler. And he and I, it was a meeting of the minds because he and I had the same goal that we should do this treatment with precision and adherence to the model. And our hope, this hope of ours, transacted nicely when we went off for formal training in 2004 as part of the Newham DBT East London team in the NHS. We had the privilege of receiving intensive training from Charlie Swenson and the late Clive Robbins. In the second, so they were both very hot and heavy on the idea that we should be doing DBT to a certain level with precision and adherence to the manual. And in the second week of training, during the case presentations and the program presentations, we were instructed to ask ourselves whether what we were seeing was indeed DBT. Is it DBT? That was what we focused our feedback on, or we were mindful of. The second week of training culminated with all 70 of us in the ballroom of this hotel where we were, the ballroom, being given poster paper with all of the different strategies of the treatment. So we each got one strategy written on this piece of poster paper. And we stood in a circle around. This ballroom instead of doing the rain dance. This was our exit exercise. So in the center of this circle, there was a role play going on of DBT, and we were instructed to hold up our posters when we saw our strategy being used. Well, I can tell you, at that moment, I was like, why is she holding up her poster? That's my strategy that's being used. No. And it really struck me that there was a lot more to learn. Intensive training was not the end of my training journey, I came to understand. But that whole experience left a huge mark, or perhaps reinforced either my underlying desire to be in law enforcement, which I've already disavowed, or my deep desire to do this with precision, compassion, and clarity. And it really struck with the whole team. So as my team endeavored on the journey into DBT and then forayed into research and RCT, the question of is it DBT was a mantra that we came back to when we had team training days every 6 months to review therapist recordings. And certainly it was at the heart of everything that we did. We debated what made certain things DBT or not, that we were observing. There were lots of dialectical discussions. And so I thank you, Charlie and Clive, for this kind of excellent setting. Then fast forward only a few months after after our intensive training, when a colleague of mine, we went to Is It DBT in New Orleans that year. I think it was in New Orleans. It was definitely in New Orleans that year. I think it was 2004. It could have been 2005. Pretty sure it was 2004. When Katie Korsland was talking about how they had just finalized this adherence rating scale. And my colleague, who I think was equally encouraging and also a little fed up with my always saying, is this DBT or not, ribbed me and said, this is something for you. And so life transpired in that way. And then in 2010, as part of the RCT research, I had the opportunity to train as an adherence rater with Katie Korsland. And I have to say that there were a few things over the course of my DBT career that I would consider major jumps in my practice. One of the major jumps in my practice that I think really helped me become a trainer was actually training as an adherence rater. That there's a very reciprocal relationship with really knowing this treatment to such a level that you could rate it for adherence, knowing the manual inside and out, and one's ability to deliver it. That whole training in terms of getting to know the adherence manual really refined the precision with which I was able to deliver some DBT. So, or all my DBT and hopefully my training as well. But as we kind of go back to the feedback from the mindfulness exercise, whatever it was, whether there was, I know Angelica and I have talked about some research that she has done on kind of barriers to therapists wanting to open up their work or wanting, to people to observe or to thinking about adherence reading, that there's often this fear or potential shame that comes along. And so I just want to remind us of some really helpful treatment assumptions that we can fall back on in doing this. First, that all behaviors, actions, thoughts, emotions are caused, that figuring out and changing the causes of behavior work better than judging and blaming, and that clarity, precision, and compassion are of the utmost importance in the conduct of therapy. I also want to emphasize the idea that being an adherent DBT therapist is not necessarily even a possibility, right? Adherence is not a quality that lives within a therapist. It's something that is context specific, that is delineated in a moment in time, and that even some of the most effective DBT therapists that I know have times when they don't when they don't deliver DBT with adherence to the manual, right? And so this is something really to keep in mind, that delivering more sessions that are considered adherent to the model is an excellent thing to do. And also, it just states that you have the capacity to deliver adherent DBT therapy, not that you're gonna do it all the time. So we can take the pressure off and just kind of be thinking about thinking about how it is that we are all works in progress, doing the best that we can, trying as hard as we can, falling back on the assumptions of our very treatment. So if we move on to some definitions here, like what is adherence and what is fidelity? So I guess it might be easiest to start out with what it is in medical sciences. So there's often a lot of confusion when we start talking about adherence and fidelity. Like, what is this? Like, huh? Because in medical sciences, adherence generally refers to what the recipient of a treatment engages in, the treatment recipient's behavior. Whereas in psychotherapy, or in DBT in particular, adherence and fidelity means that the treatment providers do what is prescribed by the treatment manual and avoid what is proscribed. And Parapetriclova and Kasdan wrote about that. So that is what we're thinking about. Are we doing what is prescribed and not doing those anti-DBT techniques? So moving ahead and looking at how this works with implementation, and is an important step in implementation. When we're looking at this implementation framework, which our colleagues put together to discuss, how one goes about implementing DBT. We see on the sides here, we see that there are things that are related to implementation in general. And then there are some things that are, they're all, things that are kind of written about as facilitators. So the framework came about by reviewing existing implementation frameworks, but also by reviewing literature that literature in DBT and journals that talked about implementation in DBT and analyzed what those themes emerging were. And so we saw these themes kind of emerging as very important here. And you'll see on the side here that for every implementation, you'll see this in yellow, we want to be thinking about, evaluating and iterative practice. So we implement, we evaluate, we reflect on what is done, and that is the sign of kind of a successful implementation. And of course, what makes evidence-based treatments that much more complicated is that they are often created under laboratory conditions and tested under laboratory conditions. And so when implementing them in the real world, often what is lost is some of this fidelity and adherence to the treatment manual, and so we want to be thinking about that. So what we're thinking about in terms of evaluating an implementation is whether DBT, so when we're evaluating the effectiveness of an implementation, we can evaluate it from the perspective of client outcomes. We can compare those to RCT results and to benchmarks that tell us if we've implemented with adherence and fidelity to the model, then presumably we should be getting similar outcomes to those that were in the RCT. And then as we get enough data in terms of benchmarking, we can start to look at kind of peer benchmarks and what's happening in the community in general, as there tends to be a dearth, the preponderance of research tends to be more about efficacy as opposed to effectiveness. So having these peer benchmarks can be very helpful. But just as importantly, it can be, implementations can be evaluated in terms of changes to the system and the structure of the DBT program, in terms of changes to the system and the structure of the DBT program, and in terms of therapist behavior. It's important to note too, when we're thinking about this, that adherence and fidelity are not the same as competence or quality. So adherence and fidelity are prerequisites for competence. It would be hard to be competent or offering something with respect to quality if one was not getting the basics of adherence and fidelity correct. So this is also something that's important to keep in mind. So then when we're thinking here, like, does this matter, right? Well, yes, fidelity and adherence matters greatly. So I just want to remind us all that May is International BPD Awareness Month. And, this is some of the most kind of stigmatized group of mental health professionals, people who have a diagnosis of BPD or, basically complex PTSD is almost identical in terms of diagnosis. But many service users need to be sure that what they're getting is quality. And recently, perhaps you've noticed, I certainly have noticed, that there's been kind of complaints about DBT and what kind of treatment DBT is. Often when I read the articles about kind of why DBT was the worst therapy somebody had ever had, and I look at it very closely, what the people who are complaining about are things definitely to complain about, but are not things that I would associate with DBT offered with adherence and fidelity to the model. So it's important to be really transparent about these things. We need to kind of first and foremost do no harm. So we want to make sure that the people who are receiving our treatment are receiving quality treatment. That one more treatment episode that doesn't work leads to increased hopelessness both for clients and for families, and we want to avoid that. We also want commissioners and people paying for services to know what is quality for their money. Their money and resources for services are limited, and so we want to help people to have guidance as to what they should be spending their money on. And then finally, researchers need to know what works and what does not work, so that they can improve that. And it's important to know whether what was delivered actually was delivered with fidelity and adherence to the model. It's also important to understand that DBT therapists, so Harned and colleagues in 2022, finally answered the question as to whether adherence matters in DBT by noting that therapists who were adherent to the model, their clients had fewer subsequent suicide attempts, and they stayed in therapy longer. So these are important things in terms of keeping people alive, in terms of people maximizing their ability in terms of people maximizing their ability to make use of the treatment. And so we're going to move now into thinking about program fidelity. And the reason why I start with program fidelity is because when we're thinking about fidelity and adherence, adherence is the behavior that that therapists engage in when offering the treatment, whereas fidelity is something about the structure, the container for the entire treatment. And so if we start there, then we know that our therapists are starting from a basis of having a structure around them, the house of DBT, to go back to Charlie Swenson, a house around them. And so the DBT program fidelity scale, which was produced in 2022 by Melanie Harned and Sarah Schmidt, is probably, as far as I'm aware, it's the first time that a program fidelity scale was produced, although we've had other ways of measuring different aspects of delivery of DBT. This is a formalized checklist for people to use. And, it's widely available with the community, in the community. And here is, it measures the functions and modes of treatment, and rates each of the functions and modes with different subsections on a scale of 0 to 2. And it's used for comprehensive DBT. So, and it measures whether a mode of therapy is being offered. But it does also kind of allow you to say it's being offered or it's being offered. So 1 would be the mode is being offered. 2 is that it's being offered to a very high standard. So there's some ability to be able to measure quality there a little bit. And it sticks very closely to how the treatment is described in the 1993 treatment manual. So you can find this on the website that I showed you there, which is theadherence.com, but this is what the measure looks like. And you can look at it there just to have a moment to, it starts with individual therapy, then I think skills training, and moves on to the different modes that allow you to assess what's going on. So then if we move on to adherence in individual therapy and skills classes with the DBT ACS, here's what we've got, right? So the need to measure adherence to the treatment in DBT became apparent over time, and particularly more important as DBT was more and more disseminated. People began to be publishing research, again, a bit like what service users are saying they're receiving in DBT, that look nothing like DBT. And so the need to have a very precise way to say actually an intervention was DBT or not became more apparent. Although to be fair, Marcia did from the beginning understand that it is important to have some way to measure, she of course being the truest scientist ever, some way to measure whether the intervention that she offered was DBT or not. And the DBT expert rating scale was even mentioned in the 1990 RCT, even before the treatment manual was created. So this is something that was very much at the heart of kind of saying this was offered by each therapist or not offered by each therapist, or to assess that. But the DBT expert rating scale, although it was used in earlier trials, was not considered to be rigorous enough. So through a long period of trial and error and refining various things, we move on to the DBT ACS. And that came about in the early to mid noughties. And the DBT ACS is a joint production with Katie Korsland and Marsha Linehan. It consists of 66 items and 12 subscales. It's on a 5-point rating scale. You need a 4.0 to have that being the cutoff for adherence. And the scale itself was closely based on operationalizing even the treatment manual, and focuses on tables in the 1993, in Linehan 1993. For example, you could look at page 451 on session structure, and there you have a table that says DBT therapist does this in the section, checks progress, or checks progress or checks behavior since last session, and all the way down to how they end their session. And it's based on these if-then rules. So that's one of the things that's very complicated about DBT. It's not it's not totally protocol based, although there are protocols in DBT, but most of it is principle driven. If this happens, then do that. Or if something happens, then do these potential multiple things. So it's a very complicated thing to assess. And it was many years later that the psychometric properties of the DBT ACS were thoroughly assessed in Harned 2021. So it's also the DBT ACS has been used for research purposes. It was also applied to DBT skills training. So in the treatment manual, you will see that DBT therapists do many of the same things in skills training as they do in individual sessions. So the DBT ACS was flexible and robust enough to capture the processes of skills training class as well as individual therapy. Although, to be fair, there's far less data on skills training in comparison to the DBT ACS use with in individual therapies. So there are some issues, though, or there were some issues. There are some issues, as the DBT ACS does remain in use, but there are some issues. And the first issue is that it is a complicated measure to use. 66 items requiring attention, man, that's a lot of information to process and put together. And it's not easy to calibrate on this measure. And therefore, it was not possible to make this available in the community. It was just far too unreliable to use. The expert rating scale relied on experts deciding from a wise mind perspective of what they were seeing was rated on, was DBT. And what was also noted with the ACS is that many notable experts in DBT could tell you that a session was adherent or wasn't adherent based on their information, but had more trouble precisely using a scale to justify those answers. So even people who were highly experienced struggled to calibrate on it. So it was not that user-friendly at times. So the DBT ACS has primarily been used for research. It still is used for research purposes. More laterally, it's been used by DBT societies in numerous places: Germany, the UK, the US, the Netherlands, to name a few, to evaluate therapists' recordings for adherence to the model. The other issue is that the gold standard rater the gold standard is basically one person, and so this left us as a community in a very vulnerable position. It was decided that we wanted something that was in the community that was more transparent, that was community-based, that was easier for people to use potentially, and Melanie Harned took on that task, and jumping along to 2022, 2023, She was very busy during the pandemic, one must say. She and Sarah Schmidt and Katie Korsland came up with the DBT adherence checklist for individual sessions. And the way that this was created was through an analysis of data from the DBT ACS. The data came from 6 RCTs, and the RCTs themselves were a combination of efficacy and effectiveness trials and happened internationally, not just in the US, because of course that's often a criticism lodged here that this is too US, what we're using was too US based, but this kind of attempted to address some of that. So 26 items were then selected, and the items were basically selected by the frequency of use on the DBT ACS. So how often did they appear? And so 26 items were selected before. So there was an intermediary process where lots of items were selected. Some were weeded in, some were weeded out through discussions with expert groups. One can imagine that the item on informal exposure would not have been one that would have made the cut initially on the DBT ACI because of its infrequent use. And yet that is one of the 4 problem-solving strategies in DBT. So that definitely remained in the final ACI, the final checklist, also included informal exposure. So adherence on this measure was rated at, you have to get a score of 23. It had the usual if-then rules. And the rating system was much more simplified from the ACS. It's binary. Either it's rated on a 0 to 1 scale, 0 meaning that the strategy was not used and it was needed, or that it was not done effectively. It's completely open to and transparent, so anybody in the community can go to that adherence website and download it and use it. And the binary scale definitely simplifies the rating process. In addition to it being open and transparent, it's also, because it's open and transparent, it has been translated into numerous languages, and it is relatively easy to translate and validate in different languages. Some of the disadvantages, though, which were a little bit unexpected, were potentially a little bit unexpected, is that it's equally difficult to become a reliable rater on the DBT ACI, that people actually do just really struggle to classify the behavior that they're seeing in a DBT session. And also with another disadvantage is that with its simplification of what are essentially DBT items, many items from that 66 item scale were cut out. And so there's a potential oversimplification of DBT. And one of the downsides to any adherence rating, I don't really think there are that many downsides, but one of the downsides, if there are any downsides, is that sometimes people become so focused on providing an adherence session that they lose the forest from the trees. And by the forest from the trees, we also mean they lose the ability to be responsive to what they're seeing in their client in the moment, and they just do behaviors related to adherence as opposed to applying the whole wide range of strategies that are possible within DBT. And with the limited number of items, it is potentially more likely to happen with the DBT ACI, even more likely than if you tell somebody what are the essential items on the DBT ACS. So, what makes it so difficult? Moving right along, what makes it so difficult? It's complicated. There are so many possibilities. So the it's complicated bit just does not just apply to your Facebook relationship status. It's complicated definitely applies to DBT. And, Inherent in DBT is an emphasis on speed, flow, and movement. This is prized in DBT, being dialectical, moving around, keeping the client decentered in some way, but it makes it very hard to catch everything that is happening. There are also mindfulness issues that come up. Even though we DBT therapists are extremely practiced at attention control, at using mindfulness from the psychological perspective, at kind of focusing our spotlight of attention, believe it or not, we often see behaviors that are not there. Or we're not seeing behaviors that are there. Can you imagine? I mean, it's hard, right? Often we find too that even people who know the treatment very well want to make rules or rules about what should happen. And often that's based on kind of knowing what would be more effective in a given situation. So, for example, something that blows everyone's mind, anybody who is trained, supervised as I was by Heidi Hurd, who told me that there needed to be a behavioral chain analysis in every session. Well, actually, that is not required. That is not a rule, right? So that is an example of kind of rules that get that people may arbitrarily create. And actually the rule is that a BCA is required when somebody has life-threatening behavior or a high urge to do so. Another thing in terms of mindfulness that gets in the way is making interpretations of therapist intent. And then sometimes what also gets in the way is confusing your role as an adherence rater and a supervisor. So this gets back to what I was saying. It's entirely possible that as a supervisor, you would be like, don't do that again in session. That was not terribly effective. And it might have been adherent, right? So even though there is a relationship between these two things, when we're doing adherence rating, we're really just looking at the behavior that's occurring or not occurring, and asking ourselves what would be required as opposed to really focusing in on what would be the optimal behavior. So as we move forward into the next bit here in terms of the practical bit, I felt that I would be remiss not to have a Star Wars little clip, because Marsha is our Jedi warrior, but of course our Jedi master, but of course today is, in the English-speaking world, Star Wars Day, May the 4th. So May the 4th of DBT adherence rating be with you, and this clip seemed fitting. So let's just see what Yoda has to say about this, because this will apply to what we're doing in terms of looking at, in terms of our practice exercise.
We'll never get it out now.
So certain are you? Always with your word cannot be done. Do you not think that I say?
Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different.
No different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
All right, I'll give it a try.
No. Try not. Do. Or do not. There is no try.
Words to live by, right? DBT words to live by. So often in kind of approaching this, we do need to unlearn some things. We need to be willing to be open to feedback, to to doing over and over and over again. And as we're moving toward our practice exercise here, we want to remember that DBT tells us to apply the scientific method, right? So we observe and describe without adding interpretations or making assumptions. We collect data and analyze that data. And that's what I want us to do in terms of, let's start by observing and describing behaviors, right? So if you're considering, like, how do we do some adherence rating even, or how do we help each other in supervision or consultation team? I'll just teach you what dear Katie taught me back in 2010, how it all started back in Wales in 2010, how it all started for me, that is, in terms of the helpful steps. Get out a piece of paper, or if you type super fast, you can use your computer, but I can't type that fast. And you want to like transcribe what you hear the therapist doing, right? And potentially like timestamp things. So Katie would say things like, pretend you're in the court of law and you're going to have to defend why it's this strategy. So you need to know what time that occurred, what exactly occurred. You're like a witness on the witness stand here, right? And what we want to keep in mind is that we're paying attention to the therapist's behavior. So, and this is also like complicated, like it's complicated enough to pay attention to the therapist's behavior. The therapist's behavior is what we're rating when we do adherence rating. And it's also necessary to note the response of the client, because the emphasis, that should say, is on the therapist's behavior. But we do need to note whether the client is being moved and impacted, and in what way. In the ways we want it to happen is the therapist then taking back that data from the client and changing their tactic. So in supervision, though, you would probably spend more time thinking about the transactions that are happening in a moment-by-moment basis in each session, whereas in adherence rating, you're really mostly focusing in on the therapist's behavior. And so as you're writing down everything frantically, I did get lots of hand cramps. As you're writing down everything frantically, there was a lot of dots, and initially in this process, a lot of stopping the tape to catch up with my writing. But as you're writing it, in the margin, imagine, write the strategies or the strategies you think might be being used in the margin. You'll come back afterwards. So after, so you want to watch and listen to the whole DBT session, as DBT strategies occur in every second of the session. Like there are times when I was like, well, this person, according to the DBT ACS, for example, you would need to check in about other modes of therapy. And there would be times when I'd be like, well, this person, I have to give them non-adherent on this item. And then in the last 10 seconds of the session, they would ask, so how was group this week? Well, if I had tuned out, I would have missed that at all. Then after you listen to the whole session, you want to ask yourself, is it wise? You want to ask your wise mind, is it DBT? How adherent would I say it is? Where would I kind of say that it rates? Just below, just under, really the best session I've ever seen? Why? What do you think might be being left out, right? So then after you do all of that, you want to go back and review your notes. Write in all the strategies you've observed. You want to reflect in a systematic way on what might have been needed. From an adherence point of view, some things might have been needed, and from a supervisory point of view, some things might have been needed. And did the session include any anti-DBT things in it? Okay, so as we move on now, what I have done here is pulled up the exposure role play that Michaela and I did back in March. For many reasons I pulled this, sorry, now I'm speaking like Yoda. For many reasons I pulled this out, I did. The reasons include that it's easily accessible. You can go back to it as often as you want. And that's not my tricky, cheeky way of trying to get more hits for our website on YouTube, but it doesn't hurt. It's great to demonstrate. It demonstrates informal exposure, which I can tell you is the most underused strategy in all of DBT and potentially the most helpful strategy in DBT. So any opportunity that I personally can have as a trainer and as a therapist, both to observe more exposure and to train more exposure, I'm taking it, let me tell you. And also, the client was settled in, as the client, and where Michaela and I were in therapy in this moment, as the client, I was settled in the session. And in general, I was willing to work with the therapist. I was not dysregulated in the moment. So sometimes it's easier to see what's going on when everybody's a bit sort of regulated, as it were. And, there were no therapy interfering behaviors that Michaela had to work with. Michaela is also an extremely skilled therapist. I love watching her work. And, she was also very graciously receptive to my query as to whether it would be okay with her if I used this as our example. So it's about 20 minutes long, and I would suggest you do the things that I suggested you do to take note of this, to take note of what was going on, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
She's a bit flaky, right? Yeah. So if we could have, obviously, if we could get her to not cancel, that would be great. And she is not in therapy with us, and she does do this quite often. And also, in life we have to, this happens, right? So, it seems to me that maybe if we could have got that to go differently at the start, then you wouldn't have ended up harming. Do you agree with that?
We have had this conversation before, and I see where you're coming from on that. I see where you're coming from on that, but why should I experience any sadness about this? I didn't screw this up.
No, I know. And, sadness to me, I don't know if you remember from skills class, do you think sadness was warranted in this circumstance?
You mean did I lose something?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess I wanted to go to coffee. I wouldn't have any other plans for the weekend, so.
Right, exactly. So, sadness makes sense, right? Yeah. So we don't want to get rid of it altogether, because if you didn't have sadness at all, then it would be pretty, you're wanting to build relationships and be in a kind of a significant relationship, and we have to be able to feel that people's behavior impacts us. So if we kind of totally muted you from sadness and got rid of it, that's not going to help your relationship goals. So the thing is, you kind of felt sadness at 3 out of 5. That's 60%, right? So, do you think that's, is that the amount of sadness you want to experience?
I definitely don't want to experience that amount of sadness.
No, right.
And I didn't have anything else to do that weekend.
No, exactly. So, do you think it would be useful for you to be able to, when these things happen, to experience less intense sadness than you did on that occasion?
Well, I'm still a little bit caught on why it is that I need to experience sadness at all here. I get what you're saying about this loss issue, but honestly, she screwed up.
She did. And the thing is, if we could solve this by just you not having her as a friend, then that would be a reasonable thing. That would be one solution. It's let's not have her as a friend, right? But is this not what happens though in relationships, that people disappoint you occasionally? Yeah, right. Yeah. Even sometimes at work, you're disappointed in your work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So would it be helpful to be able to experience sadness but not be so wrecked by it?
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what I'd like us to do is I'd like us to do something called exposure. Yeah. And this is an intervention which we do when we've got an emotion that makes sense, the sadness makes sense, but it's too intense. Yeah. I don't know, do you like spiders?
I don't love them, but I don't mind them, but I think I know where you're going with this, because I hate snakes, and somebody told me that if
Yeah, yeah. If you won like a trip of a lifetime, you know,
I mean, because I want to go to South America and
you want to
somebody
go to
was
South
saying
America,
to me that
right? Yeah.
I'm gonna have to like deal with snakes,
Go
and I
with
was like,
snakes. Yeah, yeah. So you're going to have to kind of be able to, be able to be in the presence of snakes. And so, kind of, and if we were, like if my job was to help you get ready, and I have to say, if we have to do snake phobia work to get you ready to go to South America, I'm all up for that. We'd have to get you in contact with those snakes, and we'd have to stop you from running away. Okay? Yeah. And it's a bit the same with this, is that when you feel the sadness, what happens is you don't run away in the sense that you kind of run out of the room, but what happens is you end up angry. And anger is a little bit like the running away from the sadness. I don't know, do you see that? But like, you end up angry, and that's not pleasant, but it's better than being sad.
yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just really hard because I don't really like how it feels, the sadness.
No, I don't think anybody does. I mean, that's just the thing. It just doesn't. Whereas anger sort of feels a bit more like you feel a bit more self-righteous and like she cancelled on me and she shouldn't have done that and it's all her fault.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a way, that is also fine. But the problem is when that happens, you then end up harming yourself. And so, like, you're the one that suffers, really. Yeah. So, if we're going to do this, what we have to do is I have to get you to be in touch with the cue that elicited the emotion, yeah, and to feel the sadness a bit, yeah. But I don't want you going off to be angry, okay? So if I notice any signs of that, I'm going to try and stop that, yeah? Like one thing I think might happen is you might get a bit angry with me for doing this. Do you think that's likely?
I don't think it's unlikely.
Yeah. So we just have to watch that, because every time you go to anger, then you don't learn that actually you just stick with it, the sadness will come down. This is the thing, you see, is that you're kind of in a way you go to anger because I think your kind of brain has got this belief that like the sadness won't come down, you'll be like engulfed by it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
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 So what I'd like you to learn is that actually it's possible to have disappointments and actually not be wrecked by it. I mean, do you think that would be useful? Do you think that could be useful to you?
I think it could be useful, but it's just so like much.
I know, it's so much. So here's the thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use some of the other skills that you've been learning to help us with this. Because what I noticed is when it starts to happen, you then start having interpretations about like, she doesn't care about me, this always happens to me, and that seems to drive the emotions up, yeah? So when we do this, we're going to have to use some of our other DBT skills, yeah? So that thought like she doesn't care about me, can you think of a more mindful statement about the facts?
Well, I know that she does care about me because after I harmed myself, I contacted her and she then changed her plans. I guess in that moment, a more mindful statement might be something like, she wasn't feeling well that day. So that's what she said, although
but maybe
I wasn't 100% sure that I believed her. But yeah, that's what she said.
Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering if we just stuck with the facts. What were the facts? The facts that you absolutely knew.
Well, the facts were we were supposed to meet on Saturday at 2 p.m. for coffee, and at 1, when I was getting ready to leave, she texted and said, really sorry, but I don't feel up to meeting. I have a migraine coming on.
Right. So those were the facts. That was the facts, but there was another fact, wasn't there? That also, when you saw that, you felt sad. Yeah. Can you tell me, where did you feel the sadness in your body?
Well, I mean, like, I mean, as soon as I saw it, I had this like drop in my shoulders and just sort of like this like,
Yeah.
and then I guess very quickly I was like, yeah, for crying out loud again. Like, why is this happening to me
Yeah.
again?
And then you got into the anger, and then yeah. Okay.
I mean, if I could tell you exactly how often this has happened to me, you would understand why
Yeah.
I like.
Yeah, no, I get it. And if you've got a flaky friend, it's going to happen a lot, and it's kind of really frustrating. Yeah. So, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to think ourselves back to Saturday morning, yeah, when you got this text, okay? And I want you to really practice being very mindful, as we said, just sticking with the facts, yeah, I'll help you. But also, watch for going too slumped in your body. See if you can kind of go a little bit opposite to that sadness, just a little bit in your body, yeah? Okay.
Okay.
All right. I won't make you do it for too long. And I'm going to be on the lookout for those angry things, and I'm going to try and stop that. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, what I'd like you to do you have your phone? Do you have the message? Can you open up the phone and get the message? What's happening with your emotions right now? Let's just get a bit of a check. Where is it now? Where's your sadness?
Not feeling terribly sad. I think you're right. I'm feeling a little bit irritated that I have to do this when
right.
I didn't even make this problem.
No, exactly. Okay, so just notice that and just come back to sort of remember we're doing this because it will be useful to you. Yeah, it's not because it's about something about her. It's about what will be helpful to you. Okay, so just open that text message and just read it. Read it to yourself. And just stay with the facts. Okay, now I'm watching. If something's happening on your face there and your body's going, can you just try and sit up? Can you sit up? Can you hold your phone like this? You know? Okay, right. And now just try reading it. Yeah. Now tell me, where's your sadness right now? Okay, where is it now? Give me a rating, because you're slumping. You're slumping. Can you just tighten up your muscle tone a little bit? Yeah.
That's like at 2, let's say 1.5, 2. I mean, it does really change if I tighten myself a bit. Like,
Okay.
I feel like I slide into it.
Yeah, no, right. Exactly. You know, we don't want to get rid of it because a little bit of it is fine, you know, because this is a disappointing thing. Yeah. Are you noticing any irritation or any?
No, in fact, I guess if it doesn't get so high,
You don't want
I
to.
don't know, it seems strange. I don't really want to run
You
away.
don't want to run away from it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah. So maybe you should experience it a little bit more then. So maybe don't tighten up so much. Maybe experience a little bit more of the sadness. Okay, that might be a little bit too much. We'll see. Are you noticing any kind of urges to escape or anger coming up?
I have like, the thought is coming like, again,
Right,
again.
okay. Yeah,
Why
yeah.
is it always like that?
So just let that go. Just let that go. Yeah, and just keep reiterating, what are the facts? Just tell me, what are the facts?
Facts are, we're supposed to meet. She texts, she says she can't meet. She doesn't feel well. She has the beginning of her migraines coming on.
Yeah, and what do you feel? What are the facts about what you feel?
I have this moment of, well, now what am I going to do all weekend long? This was my one social outing of my weekend.
Okay, so we're getting into that. So we're trying, and that what might be a good thing to go to is problem solving, but that probably also leads you to feeling irritated with her. Yeah. So just stick with what is it?
I wanted to see her.
You wanted to see her, yeah, of course you did. And you know, you might feel some loneliness this weekend, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was definitely like, yeah.
And what about, have we got any irritation coming yet?
No, not right at this moment.
No. And what's happening with the sadness? Has it gone up or down or stayed the same?
It's gone down a bit. It's gone down a bit. It didn't get as high, but
No, of course not. Yeah, no, it wouldn't do really, because it was also kind of the shock, plus the, like, you were looking forward to it, and so then it was like the contrast.
But I think it's also like having you to talk to about it, like
Of
it makes sense differently, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I mean, that would have been one thing you could have called me at the weekend. But let's just do it one more time. Let's just open it up and just read it again. And tell me, how intense is the sadness right now? Where are we at?
A little over 1.
Okay, which I think is probably fair, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what do you think you've learned from this experience that we've done here today?
Well, I'd like to say I've learned how to get rid of flaky friends, but I guess what I've learned
We can work
is,
on that if you like. We can work on that next.
no, I mean, I guess what I've learned is that maybe the sadness is too much sometimes, and that's a bit of the problem, and that if I could kind of just experience it without it getting so overwhelming, maybe I could just experience it.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I remember like back in skills class, like, I was disappointed. I think that's the right word. I was disappointed. This was not.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I would be disappointed too. And also, I think given how few social contacts you have, I think a greater intensity of disappointment would also be totally warranted. It's not like you had, 4 events happening over the weekend. So a greater intensity does make sense. Yeah. But I think one thing, what I'd like you to really watch for is these times when, when you're angry, when you get angry about stuff, I want you to be curious about whether actually you're escaping from something. And it could be sadness or it could be another emotion. Because what we really want to do is to try to figure that out so that we can maybe go back to just experiencing that first emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Because I think we've seen this a few times, is that sadness certainly can lead to this. Sometimes shame does the same thing for you, I think. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. So when you notice that tension and you're kind of getting angry and you're kind of, that this was always happening to me, that might be a moment just like, oh, hang on a minute. Wait.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that I'm trying to escape from?
Mm-hmm.
But then it's really important to stick with the facts, like not like this is always happening to me. People always do this to me, because that's just gonna.
That's happened to me a lot, though.
Just happen to you. Like, it's fine to say this happens often to me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But we don't want to get into being very judgmental about it. We just want to be sticking with the facts. Yeah. And if saying this happens often to me is cranking it up too much, then just stick with this is happening to me now. Okay? All right. Great. All right, well, we'll pause there. Thank you.
Okay, so what strategies did you see used? Now, here, one of the complicating bits about looking at this particular clip, if there is a complicating bit, is that informal exposure involves a lot of different parts to it. So that was a more complex intervention to kind of break down. I'm not going to focus here on specifically getting hung up on rating the session, because the first building blocks of doing this are just recognizing what it is you want to see. So here's what I saw. Here's what I saw. I saw some strategies being used. I saw the strategies of exposure, which included pulling out new behaviors and coaching and paying attention to in-session behaviors Michaela oriented me to what exposure was. She told me, she presented the cue related to the sadness. So there was a lot related to that. She also interweaves other skills and strategies such as mindfulness of thoughts and the current moment and opposite action to facilitate the exposure to sadness at a level that matched the facts of the situation. She did some education about emotions and exposure in general. And the use of commitment through connecting slightly to life worth living goals. We might have talked a little bit more about commitment to things, but there was the mention that if I ever wanted to, related to friends and travel, things of that sort, there was a generation of solutions a variety of solutions, a suggestion of some potential ways to generalize the learning that I had done, or the client had done. There was some pattern recognition, challenging of cognitions. There was lots of validation. I saw all levels of validation being used there. And the stylistic strategies, there was kind of matter of fact and reciprocal. So lots of stuff. And a couple of the behaviors could have been placed in more than one category, for example, but this is ultimately generally what I went with. So with the stylistic strategy of being confrontational, where Michaela was saying, listen, this is your problem to deal with. Your friend is not in therapy with me. It kind of sucks. Could have potentially been seen as kind of a dialectical stance. However, I chose to put that in matter of fact. So these are all things that we could be debating at times, matter of fact being an irreverent strategy. These are all things that we could be debating and talking about. And this is what we adherence raters get together and do. We look at the same sessions and then we debate. We agree on lots of it, but we debate on some of it. So fun group we are for a dinner party, just saying. So great. Hopefully you got some of those too. And you can go back to the notes that you took and see if you can pick out some of the things that are on this list. So in terms of our next steps, though, in terms of the next steps here, what we're thinking about in terms of taking it forward is, with this particular session, what, if any, supervisory advice would you give to Michaela? Like, I was thinking, well, would you say something about kind of the flaky friend as a judgmental statement? Would we do... What advice might we tell her to do more commitment to doing outside of session practice and troubleshooting? What advice might we give? There's always different ways to go. And in general, I think we would probably all agree that this was quite an adherent use of informal exposure. In general, though, in terms of taking it forward, you want to engage in the continuous process of learning DBT. It never ends because new adaptations challenge us all the time to refine our understanding of the model. So for every new adaptation to DBT that comes out, we also want to be looking closely at the strategies being used in that treatment and being able to kind of distribute those strategies to the actual original treatment manual. And most often that is a possibility. So that's good news, right? Listen to as many sessions as you possibly can. Expose your work. Of course, it is always, always, always a vulnerable one. Always understandably feels very vulnerable when they make their work public, or not even public, but public to their consult. And at the same time, it is the way to learn. This is a group treatment. This is a team treatment, and the team need to see what we're doing. We're in it together. Everybody's doing the best that they can and can try harder. So do that. And then work with your consult on the correct labeling of behavior. And then in terms of kind of paying attention to your own behaviors that are likely to be out of adherence, I just want to highlight Harnett et al.'s, I was one of the authors on this, work on what is likely to be out of adherence. And so based on data from 2 studies, acceptance strategies are most likely to be adherence. So that would be validation and mindfulness, those things that are related to acceptance. On the acceptance side of the spectrum are most likely to be adherent. Structural strategies in between, and the ones least likely to be adherent are the change strategies and the dialectical strategies. So by change strategies, what we're talking about is generally not the things that are likely to be out of adherence are not generating the solutions, but actually getting clients to practice solutions with you in session, practice, to getting commitment from them and troubleshooting that commitment for practice outside of session. And we do see that even though that dialectics or use of dialectical strategy tends to fall out in some way, and that probably occurs for various reasons, but dialectical thinking is perhaps more complicated, and the weaving in of dialectics is a little bit more complicated in terms of the therapist kind of being on it with metaphors or modeling dialectical thinking or talking about the interconnected nature of reality. So these are things that we can be thinking about. And that data definitely confirms practice-based literature that Jesse Holman and colleagues wrote and myself wrote about in terms of shaping, training and shaping people toward adherence. So good news. Good news, we're at the end of this. So I just want to thank you so much and see if there are any questions that I can answer.
As we should say, thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for a very interesting session. And let me have a look and see if there's any questions in the chat.
Great. If not, then.
And feel free to ask. But for now, it seems like you answered already all the questions because there are none in the chat.
Okay, then.
But I'm not going to let you go early.
Oh, no.
So don't.
I thought we would all want the gift of time. I mean, because this is, of course, a very big DBT week, right? So mine is just kicking off a whole week of DBT, EDBTA events.
Yeah, we're all very looking forward to Gdansk, also the conference. But and then I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you a question that I actually asked you once before when we did like some advertisement for the Facebook reel, because we were discussing, like you started with also like this talking about all these feelings that it evokes when people hear about adherence. And for the people not here who didn't see the reel, like I've talked to what I find very competent DBT therapists and DBT trainers, and they're just like said, "Oh, I'm too scared. Like I like to rate others, but I'm scared of being rated." Like you said, also you said like they're vulnerable, and it's and one even said like I put all my eggs in the DBT basket, and what if I'm not good at it?
Well, I mean, I think it's very, sorry. So let me let you ask a question before I jump in with all sorts of things I want to say about that.
Yes, and that was what I wanted to ask you. What do you want to tell them?
Well, what I want to tell them is that adherence does not live in a therapist. One has adherence sessions, and that I've seen a variety of extremely expert therapists having off days, and that's perfectly okay, and that's to be expected, right? I would also want to tell them that super therapists lean into the strategies of their own therapy. And so in this therapy, when there's an emotion that's inhibiting or blocking effective behavior, we might consider opposite action and problem solving around that. So while their emotions around this are completely understandable, anybody can understand that. I've certainly felt that way myself. We also do have the ability to be mindful. We have the ability to seek our wise-minding, goal-directed behavior, and to use opposite action and problem solving. So we ask other people to expose themselves greatly. We ask therapists, we ask clients to talk about the most vulnerable things in their life. Like, this is nothing in comparison to what our clients have to go through. And honestly, you only have to gain. It feels as though there's potentially a lot to lose, but I can say, having been on both sides of the equation, there's everything to gain from it. My practice has just really gotten a lot more effective as a result of exposing myself to this, to either starting out by rating my own sessions. So that might be a graded exposure, rate their own sessions, then, share parts of it, just kind of have this be part of the model, and then it becomes commonplace. And there's always that worry. So that can be validated, but just because you have an emotion doesn't mean you have to act on it. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
But like we heard in the beginning, like you have all this experience with like working with this for NBC and for the UK Society, but do you also have experience with working like teams rating themselves within the team? Or no?
I've used this with my own team back in East London way back when, before I was even trained in this. We basically just created our own little scale, and we would use this and kind of fill in what it is that we identified being seen when we were rating tapes. So we would come together every 6 months and just have a training day where we'd watch a couple of full sessions, and we'd make sure to watch segments from every single therapist's. Every single therapist was expected to bring something, and we would watch something from every single therapist. So while strict rating is about seeing a whole session, it is good to practice, potentially helpful to practice just on segments. And I'm always walking around with the question, is it DBT, right? So dinner time at my house, is it DBT? Okay, not that far, but anything that you're seeing, you want to be thinking, is this DBT and why?
That's one thing, like think about, is this DBT, and show segments. And any other tips and tricks that you have for any viewers who might like to implement this or start doing this in their team?
I think it's also really helpful to see on the dbtadherence.com website, there are 11 videos for English speakers. There are 11 videos there that then employ that are then used to rate, and you can see what's considered adherent. You can see what's not considered adherent. So just doing that. But I would kind of set my biggest tip is really to say, set the expectation and intention that everything that we do in DBT, we're going to be open to kind of asking that question. DBT is a manualized treatment with various different different functions and modes, where we should be doing basically the same things in each of those modes. So it's better to open yourself up, be corrected about people's drift from the manual, and come back to it than continue to reproduce things that have drifted from the manual. Also, drift is a very common thing. So we don't have to be afraid of that. We can just accept that this is a very, very, very complicated therapy, and it's quite easy to drift away. And so we need regular checks to keep us anchored into the treatment manual.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Yeva.
Yes.
She's asking, are there specific aspects for teams that are more challenging to maintain adherence?
I would say that probably the most challenging thing in some ways is to maintain adherence in the consultation team. So DBT begins and ends in consultation team. And so often we find that teams drift away from providing consultation team with as much structure and vigor related to the program fidelity scale. And then what happens is that there's a lost opportunity for DBT therapists in consultation team to actually do DBT on themselves, right? So the consultation team drifts away in some way from putting themselves on the agenda, from using all of the strategies. So those are kind of probably more difficult things programmatically. But in terms of the structure, or in terms of the strategies in individual session, I think we saw that list there, and that's a common list.
Now, there's no more questions, but so now it's your chance, people.
It's not the sexiest of topics. I won't be offended by not being inundated, and very grateful to you and Eva for asking some questions at all. So I hope it was clear, and I hope that people got something out of it.
It
And
was
I look
very
forward
clear.
to seeing you all in Gdansk.
Yeah, we're looking forward to your workshop and your talk in Gdansk as well. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And this is going to be, we're going to put it on our YouTube page and our webpage, edbta.eu. And for you, the viewers now, please fill in the evaluation form. I put it in the chat, but you can also find it on the top of our the webpage, and just click the link. I'm very grateful for that. And thank you, Amy. And
Thank you very much.